Good morning and welcome to World News on TVP World. Me, Anna Kalczynska. Overnight, Russia launched mass attacks on Ukraine. In Zaporizhzhia region, at least 19 people were wounded, according to the most recent reports. Newly released footage from the region shows Ukrainian emergency services working to extinguish fires triggered by the attacks. Ukrainian media reporting that Moscow launched over 770 separate attacks in the region, targeting civilian infrastructure, a gas station and an industrial facility. Over 50 homes were damaged in this attack. But there are also reports coming out of Russia that so far unidentified drones struck the city of Cheboksary, as confirmed by local authorities. What appeared as a plan turned out to be rather a concept, and the final arrangement is still a vague prospect. Former senior U.S. diplomats are slamming Donald Trump's plan as a distant shadow of the 1938 Munich pact, victimizing Ukraine and expecting no concessions from Russia. Moreover, experts doubt Moscow is ready for peace.
Donald Trump's peace plan is no longer a plan, but a concept that can be worked on and improved without a deadline.
That was just a map. All that was is a map. That was not a plan. It was a concept. And from there, they've taken each one of the 28 points, and then you get down to 22 points. A lot of them were solved, and actually very favorably solved. So we'll see what happens.
Ukraine, which no longer faces a do-or-die dilemma, now sees a chance to clinch a more favorable peace deal.
The principles of this document can be developed into deeper agreements, and this is our common interest for security to be real. I count on further active cooperation with the American side and with President Trump. A lot depends on America.
Former U.S. diplomats who spoke to TVP World have slammed Trump's peace plan, which includes a cap on Ukraine's troop numbers and ceding territory to Russia.
The 28-point program, which is still evolving, is a horrible starting point for this phase of negotiations. There are no territorial demands on the aggressor. There are no caps being expected upon the aggressor's forces.
Michael Carpenter, who under the Biden administration served as senior director for Europe at the National Security Council, says that the talks are doomed to fail.
I don't think this diplomacy is going to produce a breakthrough for the simple reason that Vladimir Putin is not going to want any kind of credible security guarantee that stops the fighting sufficiently to allow Ukraine to proceed with European integration and to create an independent, sovereign, democratic state integrated into the European Union. That is a strategic defeat for Vladimir Putin, and he won't allow for any agreement that gives Ukraine that opportunity.
Foreign policy expert and former U.S. Defense Department official Ian Brzezinski says a just peace can only be achieved if Vladimir Putin feels that his regime is threatened.
Putin requires two things to cause him to change course. One, he has to see his territorial gains, these illegal territorial gains, to be put at risk. And then two, he has to see his own regime being put at risk. The West has the capacity to do that. It just has to act.
Next week, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to Moscow with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to further negotiate the peace plan with Vladimir Putin.
Bloomberg reports that on October 14th, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov he could pressure Ukraine and President Donald Trump into accepting a Moscow-friendly peace deal. Witkoff suggested concessions involving Donetsk and possible land swaps, saying Trump would give him discretion to negotiate. The recorded call took place days before President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Washington seeking U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles. Bloomberg reports Witkoff pushed for a call between Trump and Vladimir Putin ahead of that meeting. Moscow's demands remain maximalist, including recognition of occupied territories as Russian, limits on Ukraine's military, and abandoning NATO aspirations. Kremlin envoy Kirill Dmitriev has denied the authenticity of these recordings. President Trump said he saw nothing unusual in his representative's actions, calling it a standard thing and part of how a dealmaker operates. France and the United Kingdom will lead a new joint task force aimed at reinforcing post-war security guarantees for Ukraine. Following the video conference of the Coalition of the Willing on Tuesday, officials co-chairing the meeting, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer and Friedrich Merz, released a statement expressing their support for Donald Trump's effort to end Russia's war against Ukraine. The US and Turkey will also participate in the new task force. The exact placement and responsibilities of the unit are not clear yet. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also took part in the call. The leaders have repeated their calls for Ukraine to be involved in any talks regarding ending the war. London's Starmer announced that the UK will deliver more air defense missiles to Ukraine within the next weeks and is ready to cooperate with the European Union on providing financial support to Kiev, basing on frozen Russian assets. The European Commission is ready to present a legal text on the use of frozen assets later today. Polish President Karol Nawrocki has called for the reversal of the EU integration process and the abolishment of the position of President of the European Council. However, government ministers have highlighted that Nawrocki was not speaking on behalf of the Polish government and lacks any legislative route to pursue his agenda.
Poland's President Karol Nawrocki was welcomed to Prague on Monday by his Czech counterpart Petr Pavel. He later used an address to university students to call for fundamental changes to the European Union. Poland's head of state said he wants to curtail EU centralisation, which he claimed would deprive member states of their sovereignty and weaken democratic systems. He called for the abolition of the position of the President of the European Council and changes to the voting system in the EU Council. According to the Polish press agency, Nawrocki presented what he called a Polish programme for the European Union. However, Polish government officials have been quick to highlight that as president, Nawrocki does not speak for the country because foreign policy is not part of his remit.
The president, by putting forward controversial proposals for changes to the principles of the community's functioning, cannot claim to be speaking on behalf of Poland. Because it is the government that conducts foreign policy, and it is the government that decides on our relations with the EU. It is worth coming a little down to earth. I kindly inform you that the Council of Ministers has not authorized the President to submit proposals for amending the European treaties.
While ministers may dismiss the President's calls for EU reform, it is unlikely to stop Nawrocki trying to gain ground in this area.
Polish Justice Minister Waldemar Żurek has said Warsaw will have to, in some way, implement the ruling of the Court of Justice of the European Union on the legality of same-sex marriages across the EU. The Justice Minister added that the Polish constitution does not prohibit same-sex marriages and that Tuesday's ruling will have to be adopted. The EU Court of Justice ruled in a case from Poland that a member state is obliged to recognize a same-sex marriage registered in another EU country, even if the law of that country does not recognize such marriages. The ruling comes after a same-sex Polish couple's wedding in Germany was not honored by the Polish authorities. An agreement has been reached between Poland and Angola at the African Union-European Union summit Tuesday. The agreement involving critical minerals is part of the EU's wider search for resources it needs to meet climate goals and energy independence. Sofia Ba in Luanda has more.
One of the topics on the agenda for the second day of the European Union and African Union summit here in Luanda is critical minerals. Boosting trade of minerals is likely the top priority as EU seeks to secure critical minerals needed for its green transition and to reduce its dependency on China for minerals used in electronic goods. Africa has emerged as a battleground for its critical minerals and energy potential. The EU is trying to deepen their economic ties. However, there are obviously other big players like China, the United States, and Russia. Interestingly enough, talking about the EU, for example, Poland and Uganda have now entered a new phase of cooperation in the mining sector, with the two governments committing to begin joint mineral exploration, support research and technology development, and pursue potential investments. However, we did hear during this summit here in Luanda that African countries do not want to be seen as just a source of exploration for critical minerals. This might be the reason why the Polish and the Ugandan collaboration is based on agreement that the Ugandan resources such as copper and cobalt will be processed in Uganda before leaving the country. Sofia Ba, TVP World, Angola.
Polish energy giant Orlen has decided to invest some 200 billion euros to purchase 40 electric locomotives. This is the largest such investment in the history of Polish rail cargo.
With these signatures, the biggest deal in Polish cargo rail has become reality. Worth nearly 200 million euros, the order will provide Polish energy giant Orlen with 40 new electric locomotives.
Advanced locomotives mean modern, efficient transport. It is a much more cost-efficient form of transportation. It also contributes to the development of the entire sector.
The locomotives, designated for the transport of petrochemicals and fuel, are set to join Orlen Rail's fleet in 2027 and 2028.
This money, provided through the Polish bank, will be used for the purchase of Polish products from Polish companies, which employ a total of 6,000 Polish workers and cooperate with a total of 2,500 small and medium-sized enterprises.
But this is only a drop in the ocean of Orlen's ambitions. So far in 2025, the company has invested over 5 billion euros in various projects, a figure which is set to grow to 95 billion within 10 years.
In the coming weeks, the Polish government is expected to unveil a draft law introducing a digital tax. Set at a rate of 3%, the tax would apply to all online platforms with annual revenues of at least 750 million euros. Its scope would cover social media platforms, ride-sharing applications, e-commerce firms, digital advertisers and companies gathering data in Poland. According to Krzysztof Gawkowski, the Polish Minister of Digital Affairs, the measure is expected to raise 700 million euros in 2027. Several other EU countries have adopted similar solutions, which have proven successful. France, for instance, is expecting to raise 800 million euros next year. However, it introduced its tax before President Trump took office. Some experts fear that if Poland proceeds, it could face retaliation from the United States. A new burst of winter weather is sweeping across Poland today, bringing heavy snowfall, freezing rain and treacherous roads across much of the country. Forecasters warn that up to 20 centimeters of snow may fall in places as temperature plunge in central and northeastern regions. Poland is under a mix of first and second degree weather alerts issued by the National Meteorological Authority. A broad high-pressure system stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to Russia is emitting a low sitting over the country's southeast, driving sharp temperature contrasts and pulling cold polar air across most regions. Snowfall in Poland is expected from Silesia in the south through Warmia and Mazury regions in the north, with freezing rain and black ice likely in the center and northeast. Winds near the Baltic may reach 65 km per hour, while stronger gusts of more than 100 km per hour in the Sudety Mountains and the Carpathian could trigger whiteout conditions. Meteorologists say the current pattern may be linked to a weakened polar vortex, which allows Arctic air to spill southward into Europe. And on that warning, we conclude this edition of World News, but please stay tuned to TVP World for more comments and news.